Like the big hand of a clock, he circled round and never stopped, not falling in or getting out, wondering what's the world about. The young cowboy rode into town in the late afternoon. He checked his horse in the first stable he saw and started to look for a place to eat and relax. The town looked kind of empty to him. When he turned the corner, he caught sight of a hill with a church on it. A festival was being prepared and was close to starting. There were a lot of people near the barn next to a field filled with tables and flowers. The cowboy decided to walk up the hill and observe all the goings-on. If there was a place he could find where he could eat and watch the activities without looking out of place, he would take it. If not, he would probably just find a place to eat in town and then walk around before retiring. He had been working at a ranch for the last several months. The rancher had a brother who needed help on his own ranch a couple of days away. He could have left with a few other cowboys, but they were planning on doing some drinking and gambling along the way. So the cowboy thought he would go by himself along a different route and see what was going on along that route. When he got close to the festival, he saw a place to check in his guns. He was reluctant to do this, so he walked around the perimeter of the festival in a circular fashion, checking things out. When he circled the festival a couple of times, a young lady walked up to him and asked him if he was going to come in. He told her he would have to check in his guns and was reluctant to do that. She asked him if he intended to use them this evening. He told her somewhat truthfully that he hated to turn in his guns and find out a few minutes later that he had to leave. She asked him why he would think about leaving so soon. He said he didn't know anybody here, and he wasn't sure he would stay very long. She volunteered to show him around and introduce him to some of the townspeople. By now the daylight was almost gone, and the festival lights looked brighter. When the cowboy looked out around him below, he could see campfires lighting at various points in the landscape. As he was looking, he told the girl, "Do you see those campfires out there? Do you know who they belong to?" She replied that she probably knew some of the people, maybe even most if she saw their faces. He told her, "I bet they all have stories to tell, some wonderful and some hard. Wouldn't it be interesting to pick one of those campfires each night, bring some food, and sit around exchanging stories, even though I would not have very many stories to tell?" She asked him where he would get this food. He said somewhat sheepishly if I had the money, I could buy some in town. She told him he was looking at the light out there, not the lights behind him right here. She took his hand and led him to the festival to meet the townspeople she promised to introduce him to. He had to check in his guns. He quickly met several of the folks, and they were more than gracious to him. Then the young lady took him to meet an old scraggly gypsy. She lives outside of town with her family at one of those campfires you saw. She comes into the town to church and helps wherever she can. For the festival, she brought in a delicious potato soup. The woman gave him a bowl of her soup and encouraged him to eat. The young lady excused herself and said she would be back. The gypsy woman sat opposite the cowboy and seemed eager to tell him all kinds of stories. He only understood about half of what she said, but the woman was so excited to tell her stories that he was drawn into the excitement contained in them too. He finished the soup and listened to her until the young lady came back. The young lady introduced him to a Confederate veteran who walked like he was crippled. He didn't want to talk much. The cowboy surmised he had lost a lot during the war, including his youth, but the man seemed to be doing guard duty on higher things. The young lady introduced him to an old black pot maker and his 2 children. She told him that they also lived out of town at one of the campfires he saw. That family also came to church regularly and helped all the folks around. The folks responded by buying the pots they made, and sometimes just gave them food or money when they needed it. The old man grabbed the cowboy's arm in a friendly manner and started talking to him about a lot of life's lessons he had learned as both a youngster and a man. The cowboy was drawn into his enthusiasm, even though some stories of sorrow and of struggle made him start feeling ashamed. They talked for a long while until the young lady invited the cowboy to dance. Even though he would have normally refused right off, this time he went with her with only a little reluctance. While dancing, he told her that all of those people at the campfires were here. She replied that most of them were, but they still look forward to people coming out to see them. That's the odd part. They wanted to live away from town by themselves, away from people, for various reasons. Yet they came to this hill for church and the festivals, looking to give and to share and to extend a hand. The evening lasted a long time. The cowboy was glad when it was over, and at the same time wished it had continued. He asked the young lady if he could meet her before he left town in the morning. He met her, said his goodbyes, and left town with a tender heart, remembering all the lights from the day before. Like the big hand of a clock, he circled round and never stopped, not falling in or getting out, wondering what's the world about.